You ever had someone try to rob you of something that runs deeper than money? Something that's not just a piece of land, but part of who you are? That's what happened to me. And let me tell you, I didn't just sit back and let it happen. That creek, my creek, wasn't something I found in a brochure or bid on in an auction. It's a silver thread that's woven itself through generations of my family. It carved a place in our memories, in our bones. We didn't just live beside it, we lived with it. It was there when my grandfather taught me to catch catfish with my bare hands. It was there when my sister and I made rafts out of barrel lids and old rope. It was there when my mother passed, and I sat by its edge for hours, letting the water carry my grief away. So when two men in shiny boots and smiles too white to be real came rolling up in their black SUV, dust rising behind them, like a warning, I knew trouble had come calling. One was tall and lean, looked like he belonged in an office with glass walls and no windows that opened. The other was shorter, stocky, with mirrored sunglasses and a voice that seemed dipped in fake courtesy. "Morning," the tall one said, stepping out like he owned the place already. "You must be Elijah." "That's right," I said, squinting against the sun. "And you are?" He held up a folder like it was a holy book. "I'm Mitchell. This is my partner, Kyle. We represent Red Rock Development. We recently acquired a parcel of land that includes this stretch of creek. We're here to let you know there may be some construction starting in the next few months." I stared at him. "You what?" He opened the folder, pulling out maps and forms, all crisp and colorful, like they thought pretty lines could make their claims true. According to county records, this area was bundled with a foreclosure lot from last year. It's all right here, legal and clean. "You mean to tell me you bought this land on paper?" I asked, my voice low, calm in the way thunder is calm before it breaks. "Not just paper, Mr. Elijah," Kyle said, finally speaking. "These are legal documents, filed, approved, stamped by the county. We have a full claim." I looked past them toward the creek. The sun had started to lean west, throwing gold onto the water's surface. That little bend where the willow leans over, that's where my cousin proposed to his wife. The flat rocks by the edge, that's where I skipped stones every evening after the chores when I was a boy. "This land's been in my family since before your granddaddy knew how to write his name," I said slowly. "That creek runs through more than soil. It runs through us." Mitchell gave a practiced smile. "I understand this is an emotional issue, but legally, I interrupted. You got a piece of paper. That's not the same as truth." He blinked, clearly not used to being challenged. "We're not here to argue, Mr. Elijah. We're giving you the courtesy of early notice. Construction will begin once the environmental review clears. There will be noise, maybe some rerouting. You might want to consider relocating any personal structures within the flagged area." I looked at the red flag he pointed toward, planted not 20 feet from where my grandfather's old canoe leaned against a tree. The audacity of it burned through me. "Get off my land," I said, not shouting, just stating it like fact. "Now." Kyle stepped forward, as if puffing his chest would help. "Look, you're not going to win this. We've got city backing, legal precedent, and a full claim. You can rant and rave, or you can talk to us like reasonable adults. Maybe we can work out compensation." "Compensation?" I laughed dry and sharp. "You think I'll take money for something that holds my family's name in its roots? You think I'll sell you my soul in acres?" Mitchell sighed, packing up the papers. "You've got until next week. Then the county surveyors come through. I suggest you prepare." They turned and walked off like they'd delivered a sermon and washed their hands of me. I stood there long after their car disappeared down the dirt road. I didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the water, watching it slide over stones that had been there longer than any courthouse. You see, they thought land was a transaction. They thought everything in this world had a price tag. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, is that where I come from, land is lineage. That creek wasn't just mine, It was my grandfather's, my great-grandmother's, my people's. It was given to us not in ink, but in blood, in sweat, in stories told beside campfires and carved into old cedar posts. And those stories, they aren't easily erased. I wasn't sure what angle they'd worked to get those papers signed. I didn't know who they'd bribed or which file they'd lost on purpose. But I knew one thing. They were wrong. Not just morally, but legally too. They just didn't know it yet. Because I remembered something my grandfather once said to me when I was a boy. "If anyone ever tries to claim this creek," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder, "you walk to the tooth. You show them what real ownership looks like." The time, I thought he was talking in riddles. But now I knew what I had to do. Because the real deed to this land wasn't sitting in a file cabinet or logged in some database. It was carved deep into the earth itself, in stone older than their company, their courthouse, even this country. They thought this was going to be easy. They thought wrong. They came back the next morning, right after sunrise. I heard their engine humming before I saw the truck. Same black SUV, same red dust cloud following behind it like shame it couldn't shake. This time, they brought company. A county officer in uniform stepped out behind them, clipboard in hand, wearing that tired look you only see on people who spend more time dealing with bureaucracy than justice. Mitchell and Kyle didn't smile this time. They didn't need to. They had paperwork and a government badge in tow, and that gave them the kind of confidence only people with power think they're owed. The officer approached me first, polite but firm. "Mr. Elijah, I'm Deputy Thorne. We've received a formal notification of property acquisition from Red Rock Development. I'm here to oversee a peaceful compliance with their request to survey the area. You've been given notice." He handed me a paper, neatly typed, signed and sealed. It might as well have been written in poison. Mitchell spoke up then, his voice as smooth as a salesman's lie. "We're not trying to cause trouble, Elijah. We're just asking you to move anything you've got near the creek. We'll need to bring in a team, mark the area for the contractors." I stared at the red and yellow flags they were already driving into the ground, into my ground, like they had a right. They hammered them in without ceremony, pushing the boundary line all the way up to my storage shed, a little wooden structure that had been standing there for over 40 years. My father built it when he was just a teenager, using leftover boards from the old barn. That shed had weathered storms, floods, lightning, and time itself. But now they were telling me it needed to go, that it was in the way. "You want me to move my life because of your paperwork," I said, low and steady. "You think because you showed up with a uniform and a signature I'll just roll over?" Kyle crossed his arms. "We're offering you a grace period. We could have come in with legal orders to evacuate the zone. This is a courtesy." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "This is theft, and you dressed it up in legal words to make it look respectable." Thorne, to his credit, didn't look comfortable. He shifted his weight, tapping his pen against the clipboard, eyes darting between me and the developers. "Mr. Elijah," he said, "if you believe there's been a mistake, you're entitled to dispute it through the proper channels. But until then, they're operating within their rights." I took a step forward, pointed to the ridge in the distance, just past the grove where the oldest cedar trees grow thick and tall. "There's a stone up there," I said. "It's got my family's deed carved right into it, not in English, in Lakota. My great-grandfather put it there with his own hands. It's older than your courthouse and truer than your surveyor's maps." Mitchell looked amused. "A rock? You're talking about a rock now?" "It's not just a rock," I said. "It's a record, a real one. Not some file that got lost or corrupted. Not some auction that shouldn't have happened. That stone proves this land isn't yours to touch. You expect the county to overturn a legal transaction based on a carving?" Kyle scoffed. "Come on, be reasonable." I took a deep breath. "That stone's not just a carving. It was documented. Registered with the Tribal Council back in 1973, then again with the Bureau of Indian Affairs in '85. There are filings in the federal system to back it up. That land was granted permanent stewardship to my family under protective jurisdiction. Now that got Thorne's attention. His brow furrowed. You have documentation of that? I nodded. I do, but the original record got buried somewhere. I've got a copy, but I don't expect you to take my word for it. That's why I'm taking you to the source. Thorne hesitated, looked back at the developers. They weren't happy. Mitchell's mouth twisted like he'd swallowed something bitter. This isn't necessary, he said to the officer. We've already cleared everything with the zoning office. And yet, I said, cutting in, you still don't have the truth. Thorne finally gave a tight nod. All right, let's go see the stone. We didn't speak much on the walk. The ridge wasn't far, but the path wasn't smooth. You had to know where to step, where to duck under branches, how to avoid the soft spots where the soil dipped and the roots coiled like snakes. I walked ahead, moving like someone who had walked that trail 1,000 times, because I had. Every twist, every worn patch of dirt, I knew them all. We came to the old tooth just as the morning sun broke through the trees. The limestone formation jutted from the hillside like a jawbone, moss and lichen hugging its flanks, shadows playing across its surface like a slow dance. I cleared some leaves from the base, then stepped aside. There, I said, pointing to the etching near the bottom. Thorne crouched down, brushing dirt from the grooves. The language wasn't one he recognized, but the marks were clean, deliberate, and unmistakably human. More than just art, it was record-keeping in its oldest form. There were names, dates, symbols of the tribe, and beneath them, a seal that had been filed decades ago, then copied and cataloged by the tribal historian, a man who died before I was even born. Mitchell and Kyle stayed behind, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. But Thorne lingered. He took a photo, then looked up at me. You're telling me there's a legal record of this? Yes, I said. This carving was officially recognized by the Lakota Nation and backed by a federal land rights agreement that was never supposed to be broken. If that land was bundled into a foreclosure sale, it was done illegally or by mistake. He stood slowly. Then I'll need to check that, he said. Cross-reference the tribal filings with the county record. If what you say is true, it is true, I said. Every word. He gave one final glance at the stone, then turned to the developers. Until further verification, I'm putting a hold on all survey and development activity near the creek. Any action taken until then could result in legal complications. Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but Mitchell grabbed his arm. Let it go, he muttered. They weren't smiling anymore. We walked back down the trail, and I could feel something shift in the air. Not just hope, but weight. Because now they knew. This wasn't just about who had the newest deed. It was about who had the oldest truth. And that truth had been waiting in the stone, patient and silent, until someone came to listen. They didn't want to come. Not at first. Mitchell looked at me like I'd asked him to hike into Mordor, and Kyle practically laughed in my face. But Deputy Thorne stood between us, clipboard gone, arms folded, giving them that firm look that said, "We're doing this whether you like it or not." I knew then he believed there was at least something worth checking out. That was all I needed, a crack in their confidence. We started the climb in silence. The trail up to the old tooth wasn't for the delicate. It wound through thick brush and uneven ground, roots like ropes waiting to trip up the uninitiated. I moved like I always had, steady, sure-footed, because the path was part of me. I didn't turn to see how the others were doing, but I heard them stumbling, cursing under their breath, brushing off branches they thought shouldn't be there. Mitchell muttered something about backwater nonsense, and Kyle responded with something unprintable. But Thorne didn't say a word. Just followed behind me like a man who had learned, slowly but surely, that the world was bigger than he'd been taught in city halls and zoning offices. When we reached the old tooth, the stone was waiting, as it always had, weathered but strong. The sun was just right, casting enough light through the trees to make the carvings visible without shadow. I knelt down and brushed off a few leaves that had drifted across its face, then stepped aside. "There," I said, pointing to the engraving. "There's your deed. They didn't get it right away." Kyle rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "It's a rock." "No," Thorne said quietly, stepping forward. "It's a record." He knelt and examined the stone closely. His fingers hovered over the etchings, tracing the shapes like a man trying to understand a language his soul recognized, even if his mind didn't. The symbols were sharp, clear, despite the years. My great-grandfather had carved them deep, knowing this. Day might come. The Lakota script wound across the stone in looping marks, punctuated by dates and a symbol I knew well. The tribal seal, marked with a circle of feathers and a buffalo in the center. Mitchell scoffed. "This could be anything. Some old carving. Doesn't prove ownership." "I have a photocopy of the filing," I said, reaching into my coat. I handed it to Thorne, a scan of the official recognition from the Tribal Records Archive. It was dated 1973, signed by the Tribal Council and certified by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My family filed this with the BIA after this was carved. There's a federal record. It's cross-referenced with a land stewardship agreement that was supposed to keep this land exempt from sale, even in foreclosure. Thorne looked at the document, then back at the stone. His jaw tightened. "I've worked with the county for 17 years, he said softly. "And I've never seen anything like this ignored in a land sale. If this was overlooked, if the parcel was bundled into auction without clearing tribal protections, that's not just a clerical error. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Mitchell stepped forward, bristling. "The county approved the sale. We bid on it legally. We can't be punished for their mistake." "You can be stopped from developing land that was never legally available," Thorne replied. Kyle tried to argue. "There's no way the county would just miss a federal exemption. That would have been flagged." "Would have," Thorne said, holding up the paper. "But it wasn't. That's why we're here, isn't it?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there, watching them, watching the way their certainty cracked like thin ice under real weight. The stone didn't shout. It didn't need to. It just was, as it had always been. The truth carved into it couldn't be rewritten with money or misplaced in a filing cabinet. It didn't care about their schedules, their permits, or the ground they thought they owned. Thorne pulled out his phone, took several photos of the stone and the carvings, then the document in his hand. "I'm filing an immediate injunction with the county. All development activity is suspended until the tribal exemption and federal." "Land status are verified," Mitchell's voice sharpened. "You don't have the authority." "I have enough," Thorne cut him off. "And once this hits the tribal land office, you'll have more to worry about than losing your construction." "Timeline!" Kyle shook his head, looking around like the forest itself was mocking him. "This is insane." "No," I said finally. "This is justice." We walked back down slower this time. Not because we were tired, but because the air had changed. Heavier for them, lighter for me. For years, I'd carried the weight of that creek in my heart, knowing someday someone would come for it. My grandfather had warned me, not in anger, but in preparation. "They'll come with paper," he'd said, "but we've got stone." And we did. That stone had waited for this moment. Not flashy, not loud, just strong and enduring, like the people who came before me, like the land itself. By the time we reached the clearing near my shed, Thorne was already on the phone with someone at the zoning office. He repeated phrases like possible exemption violation, tribal jurisdiction, and federal land. Rights, over and over. Mitchell and Kyle stood off to the side, defeated but not done, already plotting some legal maneuver in their heads, I could tell. But it didn't matter anymore. They'd lost the advantage. The creek wasn't theirs to take. That night, I walked back to the water's edge. The sun had gone down, and the stars were out, bright and clear. I knelt beside the creek, dipped my fingers into the cold current, and felt the past ripple through me. I whispered a thank you to the old ones, to my great-grandfather, who carved the truth when no one else would listen, and to the stone, for remembering when people forget. Sometimes the oldest truths don't come in ink and signatures. Sometimes they're carved into the very bones of the earth, and when someone tries to challenge them, all you have to do is let the stone speak. The next weeks were like standing in the middle of a storm that didn't know which way to blow. The county office got flooded with calls. The tribal council issued a formal complaint to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the local news caught wind of it after someone, probably Deputy Thorne, leaked photos of the old tooth and the story behind it. I was suddenly getting phone calls from reporters, lawyers, even a historian from the university 2 counties over who wanted to come document the carvings. Red Rock Development tried to push back, of course. Mitchell and Kyle came back a few times, less confident each visit. The last time they parked halfway down the dirt road, as if being seen too close to me might stain their shiny suits. They asked for a meeting, not in a courtroom, but face to face. I agreed. We sat on the porch. I offered them tea. They didn't take it. Mitchell cleared his throat and got to the point. Look, we didn't know about the tribal exemption when we bought the land. That information wasn't in the county records. We're not trying to take something sacred. We're just trying to do our jobs. I leaned back in my chair and studied him for a moment. Funny how often doing your job means stepping on someone else's grave, I said. He looked down at his hands, rubbed them together. We're not villains, Elijah. No, I said. But you're not innocent either. You saw what looked like an empty piece of land and thought it was yours for the taking. You didn't ask who lived here, who remembered it, who bled into this soil. That makes you blind, and there's no excuse for that anymore. Kyle opened his mouth, but Mitchell held up a hand. We want to settle this peacefully. We know we can't build on that creek now. The land deal's under review, and honestly, the investors are pulling out. Bad press. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch between us like barbed wire. So, Mitchell went on, we're prepared to walk away from the project, officially, but we'd like to do it quietly. No lawsuit, no protests, just a clean exit. You want me to keep quiet, I said flatly. We want to protect the reputations of everyone involved. And I want you to understand something, I replied. This creek isn't just water, it's history, it's blood. And from now on, the only reputation that matters is the one my family fought to protect for generations. You don't get to hide your mistakes behind silence. They didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, they stood, thanked me for my time, and left. That was the last I ever saw of them. A month later, the county officially revoked Red Rock Development's claim to the land. The sale had indeed ignored the federal exemption. Documents buried so deep they were only found after Thorne and a determined assistant clerk spent hours combing through archives in a back room full of rusted filing cabinets and broken fax. Machines. The tribal council sent someone out. A young woman named Mara, sharp-eyed and proud. She walked the land with me, asked about the stories behind every tree, every bend in the creek. I told her all I knew. My grandfather's lessons, my mother's songs, the time we found a bear cub trapped in the thickets and nursed it back to health before it wandered back into the woods. She took notes. She took pictures. She said she'd make sure the land was registered properly this time. No more loopholes or overlooked files. Thorne came by too, now and then. He started helping. He fixed the fence that bordered the eastern side of the property. We didn't talk much about the legal stuff anymore. Sometimes we'd just sit, drink from old enamel mugs, and watch the water roll by. I think it helped him, knowing there was still truth in the world that didn't come from a courtroom or a badge. And me, I went back to the rhythm of the land, woke, Up with the birds, walked the edge of the creek, sometimes just to feel the morning air. I fished. I mended the shed. I planted a few wildflowers near the old tooth, not to decorate it, but to mark it. Let people know it was still alive. Still, sacred. Word spread slowly, and soon enough a few others from nearby reservations started showing up. Elders, mostly. They didn't say much, just stood by the stone and bowed their heads, or ran their fingers across the carvings like they were reading. A story only they could hear. One day, a little boy came with his grandfather. The old man nodded to me, asked if the child could touch the stone. I said of course. The boy pressed his palm to it and smiled like he'd found treasure. And in a way he had. That's when I knew the fight had been worth it. Not just for me, not even for my family, but for the ones still coming. For the ones who will need to know, years from now, that this land wasn't claimed with ink, but with sweat and stone and the kind of love you only find when your roots go deep. The creek still sings. It sings at sunrise, when the light turns, gold and dances across the surface. It sings at night, soft and low, like a lullaby for those who remember. And now it sings louder, because it knows. It was almost lost, almost taken, but not anymore. They tried to claim my creek with paperwork. But I showed them the deed written in stone, and stone doesn't lie.